The cafe was dim and thick with the scent of stale cigarette smoke and brewed coffee. Henry Lefebvre's voice lowered to a cautious whisper as he leaned closer to Lucien Moreau, his portly frame filling the worn leather chair. "You want to know about Marchand?" Henry asked, his eyes darting to the window where shadows pooled against the rain-speckled glass. "There's more to that man than you've seen." "More than any photograph could capture." Lucien nodded, his grey eyes steady beneath the brim of his hat. The detective was no stranger to tragedy, but the threads of Marchand's story promised complexity beyond typical criminality. Henry continued, "He was once a promising artist, young, full of light and hope. But betrayal, that's what broke him. A friend who stole his work left him with nothing but shadows." The words hung in the air, heavy as the fog outside. Lucien felt the familiar tug of empathy mixed with professional detachment. "And the studio?" he asked, fingers tapping the ash from his cigarette. "His stage for revenge," Henry said quietly. "He twists light and shadow like a puppeteer. But the strings aren't just photographs, they're memories, lies, pain." Later, within the quiet confines of the photographer's studio, Lies Dumas sat alone, the soft hum of the developing machine a distant murmur. Before her lay a faded photograph, its edges curled and yellowed. It was a portrait of her lost sibling, eyes forever frozen in time. She traced the outline with a trembling finger, the weight of past grief pressing down. "Why did you keep this hidden?" Lucien's voice broke the silence as he stepped inside, eyes reflecting the faint lamplight. Lies swallowed hard, voice barely above a whisper. "Because some shadows never leave. They cling to you, no matter how much light you try to shine." Their shared silence was a fragile bridge over the chasm of pain and suspicion that had grown between them. Yet it was in these moments of vulnerability that trust began to take root. The night air was sharp and unforgiving as Lucien found himself confronting Julien Marchand in a narrow alley just off Rue Saint-Lazare. The gaunt figure emerged from the darkness, face partially obscured by a shadow that seemed to cling like a second skin. Cold blue eyes locked onto Lucien's with a piercing intensity, reflecting both menace and a deep well of anguish. "You think you understand me," Marchand hissed, voice low and ragged. "But you only see what I allow you to see." Lucien stood firm, the weight of his own losses grounding him. "I see a man trapped in his own shadows, Julien, and I'm here to bring light to the truth." The confrontation was electric, the tension between them crackling in the cold night. Beneath the surface, both men were prisoners of their pasts, battling inner demons as much as each other. Across Rue Saint-Lazare, the neighborhood had shifted. The once vibrant streets echoed with cautious footsteps and whispered rumors. Windows were shuttered earlier, conversations grew hushed, and an undercurrent of fear wove through the community like a gathering storm. Lucien felt the weight of these collective anxieties pressing on him. The case was no longer just about photographs or killings, it was about a fractured community teetering on the edge of despair. As the chapter closed, the echoes of betrayal reverberated through the streets and souls of Paris. Lucien and Lies, bound by shared pain and purpose, faced the darkest corners of their world. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, leaving only the fragile thread of hope that truth, however painful, might yet prevail. But in the shadows of Rue Saint-Lazare, the past was never truly gone, and the dance of light and deception continued its relentless waltz. The air inside the modest photographer's studio was thick with a haze of cigarette smoke and the faint scent of developing chemicals, mingling uneasily with the weight of unspoken tension. Lucien Moreau stood near the center of the room, eyes narrowed beneath his furrowed brow as he studied the flickering shadows cast by the solitary overhead lamp swinging gently from the ceiling. Each sway sent the light dancing across the cracked walls and scattered photographs, twisting familiar images into grotesque distortions. From the gloom near the back of the studio emerged Julien Marchand, tall and gaunt, his cold blue eyes glinting with a sinister calm that unnerved even the seasoned detective. The perpetual shadow cast across his face seemed almost to swallow the light itself, a living embodiment of the deception that had haunted this case. Lucien's grip tightened around the edge of the battered wooden table, the knuckles whitening as he braced himself against the onslaught of psychological warfare Marchand was about to unleash. "You see shadows, Detective," Marchand began, his voice low and measured, a whisper barely audible over the creaking floorboards. "But shadows are truth's companions, not its enemies. They reveal what the light tries to hide." Lucien's gaze flickered to Les Dumas, who stood near the camera setup, her dark hair pinned back tightly, face pale and drawn. Her eyes darted between Marchand and Lucien, uncertainty flickering behind her sharp features. The faintest tremor ran through her fingers as she adjusted the studio's lighting rig, casting an interplay of brightness and darkness that seemed to mirror the turmoil within her. "He plays with light as if it were clay," Lucien muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "But light is a trickster, and so is he." Les swallowed hard, stepping closer to Lucien. "He knows how to bend perception," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Each photograph, each reflection, he manipulates them to tell his own story. A story where he controls everything." Marchand smiled, a thin, cruel curve of his lips. "Control is the only truth in a world of lies," he said. "You think you can see clearly, but your eyes deceive you. Memory deceives you. Even your own mind is a labyrinth of mirrors, each one hiding a shard of the past you dare not face." Lucien moved toward the wall lined with photographs, his eyes scanning the images with renewed intensity. One in particular caught his attention, a distorted portrait, where the edges of the frame seemed to ripple unnaturally, as though the image itself resisted being contained. He leaned in, the cigarette in his mouth forgotten as he studied the subtle warping of light and shadow. "These aren't mere photographs," he murmured. "They were carefully constructed illusions. The angles, the reflections, they were all deliberate." Les nodded, stepping beside him. "Julien taught himself every trick in the book, the way he uses light to conceal, to reveal only what he wants you to see. It's a form of psychological camouflage." Marchand's eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and menace. "You chase ghosts in these frames, Lucien, but the ghosts are yours, the ones you carry inside." A sudden shift in the room's atmosphere made Lucien glance up sharply. The studio's mirrors, strategically placed along the walls, fractured the light into kaleidoscopic shards, casting fragmented images that multiplied and distorted every figure within their reach. His own reflection splintered into dozens of versions, each one slightly askew, as if mocking his attempts to grasp the truth. "This is your game," Lucien said, voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. "You think twisting reality will stop me. But I've seen through shadows darker than yours." Liz's hands trembled as she reached for a shutter release on the camera, the click echoing sharply in the charged silence. The flash briefly illuminated the studio in stark white light, casting long, shifting shadows that momentarily banished the illusions Marchand had so carefully woven. For a heartbeat, all was exposed the fragile lines between reality and deception, light and darkness, truth and lies. Then the shadows returned, creeping back with renewed menace. Marchand took a step forward, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You will see, Lucien, that the past is never truly gone. It waits in every frame, every reflection, ready to unravel your sanity." Lucien met his gaze unflinchingly. "Perhaps, but I will not let you rewrite the story." The confrontation hung suspended in the smoky air, a tense standoff where every flicker of light and shadow threatened to tip the balance. Liz's loyalty, once wavering, now solidified as she stood beside Lucien, ready to face the illusions and unravel the twisted narrative Marchand had so meticulously crafted. In that moment, the photographer's studio was no longer just a place of art and memory. It had become a battleground where truth and deception clashed in a harrowing dance of light and shadow. And Lucien knew the final act was approaching, one that would demand every ounce of his resolve and every shred of clarity he could muster. As the studio doors creaked closed behind them, sealing the room in darkness and anticipation, Lucien's mind raced with questions. How deep did Marchand's deceit run? What price would they pay for unveiling the hidden truths? And could the fragile boundary between reality and illusion withstand the coming storm? The illusions were crumbling, but in their collapse, the true horror of the case was about to be revealed. The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the grimy windows of the Rue Saint-Lazare studio, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to dance uneasily across the worn floorboards. Lucien Moreau stood silently near the center of the room, his eyes sharp beneath the arch of his neatly trimmed mustache. Smoke from his cigarette wound upward in lazy spirals, caught briefly in the streaks of slanting light before dissipating into the stale air. Across from him, Lise Dumas moved with quiet precision, adjusting lamps and placing mirrors with the delicate care of an artist arranging her canvas. The studio, usually a sanctuary of stillness and muted light, hummed tonight with an undercurrent of tense anticipation. "This has to be perfect," Lucien said, his voice low but steady. "Marchand thrives in the shadows. We need to strip those away, leave no corner dark enough for him to hide in." Lise nodded, biting her lip as she angled a small mirror to catch a sliver of light and redirect it towards the back wall. "If we can control the light, control the reflections, we control the narrative. I've seen how he manipulates the studio shadows to his advantage. Tonight, those tricks won't work." The room was a carefully balanced interplay of light and darkness. Vintage cameras lined the shelves, their lenses gleaming coldly. Photographic prints pinned to the walls caught the light in varying intensities, some glowing ethereally, others receding into obscurity. Each element added to the charged atmosphere, a stage set for a revelation long awaited. Lucien exhaled slowly, the acrid smoke curling around his face. "You ready?" Lise glanced toward the door, her dark eyes reflecting both resolve and a flicker of anxiety. "As ready as I'll ever be." They heard the faintest sound, first the soft scrape of a shoe against cobblestone outside, then the door creaked open, admitting a cold draft that fluttered the edges of scattered papers. Julien Marchand stepped inside, his tall, gaunt figure framed by the doorway, the perpetual shadow cast across his face, deepening the icy glint of his blue eyes. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Marchand," Lucien greeted, voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "We've been expecting you." Marchand's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "Detective Moreau and Mademoiselle Dumas. Quite the welcome. I must say I'm intrigued. What is this? A trap?" Lise's fingers tightened briefly on a lamp switch. "No traps here, only truth." Lucien stepped forward, the cigarette extinguished in an ashtray with a soft tap. "For too long, you've hidden behind these shadows, using light and reflection to deceive and manipulate. Tonight, that ends." As Marchand's gaze swept the room, the lighting shifted under Lise's subtle adjustments. Beams of light fractured against mirrors, casting shards of brightness that fractured the familiar shadows. The studio transformed into a labyrinth of illumination and reflection, a carefully choreographed dance designed to disarm and expose. Marchand's jaw tightened. The confidence that had once seemed unshakable flickered for a moment. His eyes darted, searching for refuge in the darkness, but the light was everywhere now, relentless and unyielding. "You think you can force me out?" Marchand's voice was low, laced with bitter amusement. "Light can be blinding, detective. It can also be deceiving." Lucien met the gaze steadily. "Not tonight. Tonight, it reveals." Suddenly, a bright lamp flared to life beside the main photographic easel, flooding Marchand's face with stark illumination. Every line, every shadow of pain and anger was cast bare. The cold blue eyes, haunted and calculating, locked with Lucien's steady grey ones. The reflective surfaces around the room amplified the intensity, multiplying the image until Marchand seemed surrounded by countless fractured versions of himself, each a mask of shadow and light. Lise stepped forward, voice steady but edged with a quiet strength. "You've used this studio as a stage for your twisted games, to distort reality and rewrite narratives. But the truth is not so easily bent. Marchand's composure cracked. His shoulders sagged slightly, the gaunt figure momentarily vulnerable beneath the barrage of illumination. "You don't understand," he whispered, almost pleading. "It's all I have left, this control, this illusion. Without it, I am nothing." Lucien's expression softened just a fraction, the detective beneath the resolve momentarily touched by empathy. "You don't have to be nothing. You can choose to end this." But Marchand's eyes hardened again, the shadow reclaiming his face. "It's too late for that." The studio seemed to hold its breath as the psychological battle reached its zenith. Lucien's plan had worked. The interplay of light and shadow had stripped away Marchand's defenses, exposing the fractured psyche beneath the mask of deception. Yet the outcome remained uncertain, the fragile boundary between reality and illusion trembling on the edge. Outside, the distant rumble of trains at Saint-Lazare station echoed faintly, a reminder of the world beyond this claustrophobic space of light and shadow. Within, the final act was unfolding, each moment charged with the promise of revelation or ruin. Lucien's gaze never wavered. "It's time to face the truth, Marchand. The photographs, the victims, the lies, it all ends here." A tense silence hung, broken only by the soft click of a shutter as lies, steady-handed, captured the moment. The light revealed all, and with it, the fragile hope of justice piercing through the shadows. But as the room held its breath, the line between light and darkness, truth and illusion, seemed as fragile and elusive as ever, and Lucien knew the battle was far from over. The air in the modest photography studio near Rue Saint-Lazare was thick with anticipation, shadows crawling along the walls like living things. Lucien Moreau stood steady, his grey eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat, surveying the gaunt figure before him, Julian Marchand, the man whose cold blue eyes had haunted the margins of this investigation for weeks. The studio's low light flickered uncertainly, casting long, twisting shapes across the photographs pinned to the peeling wallpaper. Each image seemed to pulse with a silent accusation, victims caught in frames they never chose. Lucien's voice was calm but resolute as he began, "It ends here, Marchand. Your game of shadows and deception is over." Marchand's lips curled into a bitter smile, the shadowy light deepening the hollows in his face. "You think you understand, detective. You see only the surface, the light. But the truth lies in the darkness between, in what you refuse to acknowledge." The detective's gaze flicked to the photographs, the distorted reflections dancing in the flickering lamp. He took a slow breath, lighting a cigarette with practiced ease, the glow briefly illuminating his thoughtful expression. "You used the studio, the camera, and your own twisted artistry to weave a web of lies, hiding behind illusions of light and reflection. But every trick leaves a trace." Lise Dumas stood near the window, her dark hair pinned back tightly, clutching a small leather notebook. Her eyes, wide and alert, betrayed both fear and a growing courage. The fading dusk of Paris outside painted her silhouette in fragile hues of blue and grey. The creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet echoed the fragile tension in the room. Marchand's gaze snapped to her, and for a moment something resembling regret flickered in his eyes. "You don't understand what I lost, what was taken from me. This was never just about murder, it was justice, a reckoning for betrayal." Lucien stepped closer to the wall of photographs, his fingers tracing the edges of several negatives pinned in a chaotic pattern. As he adjusted the angle of the lamp, the light shifted, revealing previously hidden details, faces blurred, shadows manipulated, scenes carefully staged. "Justice. Revenge is a blindfold that twists the truth," he said softly. "You used your art to trap memories, to distort reality, but these images betray your pain and your method." The studio seemed to contract around them, the interplay of light and shadow revealing the fractured nature of Marchand's psyche. The photographs were no longer mere pictures. They were pieces of a cruel puzzle, echoes of his past trauma. Lucien's voice grew firmer. "You thought you could control perception, make the invisible visible on your terms. But I see through your illusions. Suddenly, Marchand's composure cracked. His voice dropped to a whisper, laden with bitterness. "You think you re so different, detective? Haunted by your own ghosts. Maybe we were both prisoners of our pasts." Liz stepped forward, her voice steady despite the trimmer in her hands. "This ends tonight, Julian. No more shadows to hide behind." Marchand's eyes darted between them, desperation surfacing as the weight of his unraveling plan became clear. The lamp flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to mock his fading control. Lucien nodded to the door just as footsteps echoed in the hallway. The police had arrived. "It's over." Marchand's shoulders sagged, the mask of menace slipping away to reveal a broken man. As officers entered and took him into custody, Lucien allowed himself a moment of wary satisfaction. The studio fell silent, save for the distant sounds of Paris at night, trains rumbling, voices fading, the city breathing beneath a veil of mystery. Liz turned to Lucien, her gaze soft but determined. "The photographs, they'll always remind us of what happened here. But maybe now the shadows can finally start to fade." Lucien nodded slowly, his thoughts drifting to the fragile line between light and darkness, memory and deception. The case was closed, but the echoes lingered, shadows on Rue Saint-Lazare that might never fully disappear. As he stepped into the cool night air, Lucien lit another cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. The city stretched before him, alive with secrets yet to be uncovered, and somewhere in the shifting light, a new mystery waited to take shape. But for tonight, the shadows had been chased away, if only for a little while. The soft glow of the gas lamp cast long, flickering shadows across the worn wooden floorboards of Lucien Moreau's apartment. A haze of cigarette smoke curled upwards, blurring the edges of the photographs spread meticulously over his desk. Each image held a story, a fragment of lives abruptly interrupted. Faces caught in moments they never intended to be captured, a silent testament to the fragile line between reality and illusion. Lucien sighed deeply, the weight of the case pressing heavily on his chest even now, days after Julian Marchand's arrest. He reached for a photograph showing a blurred figure, the faintest trace of a smile frozen in time. It was one of the last images taken in Liz Dumas's studio before the final confrontation. The shadows played tricks on the face, making it seem both familiar and distant, a ghostly echo lingering in the dim light. Lucien's fingers trembled slightly as he traced the outline, memories flooding back the late nights, poring over clues, the whispered confessions, the moments of doubt that nearly broke him. The quiet knock at the door startled him. He stubbed out his cigarette and opened it to find Liz, her silhouette framed by the faded wallpaper of the hallway. Her dark hair was pinned back as always, but tonight there was a gentleness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She stepped inside without a word, nodding towards the photographs. "They still haunt us," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucien gestured to a chair, and she sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I've been rehanging them in the studio," she admitted, trying to make sense of it all. "But some images refuse to be forgotten, or forgiven." He nodded in understanding. "The studio feels different now, like a place caught between light and shadow, memory and deception. Sometimes I wonder if the truth is even worth the pain it brings." Liz met his gaze steadily. "Truth is all we have, even if it's fractured." Outside, the streets of Rue Saint-Lazare were beginning to stir with the tentative return of life. At Henry Lefebvre's cafe, the familiar chatter and clinking of cups wove a comforting tapestry against the backdrop of recent horrors. Henry himself bustled behind the counter, his warm smile a balm to the weary souls who sought refuge within the small establishment. The local community, though scarred, was slowly knitting itself back together, cautiously embracing the fragile hope that the nightmare was finally over. Lucien found himself there later that afternoon, seated at a corner table with Sophie Moreau, his younger sister and steadfast confidant. Her delicate features softened with concern as she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You carry too much, Lucien," she murmured. You don't have to bear it alone. He smiled faintly, grateful for her presence. Some burdens don't just disappear, Sophie. But perhaps it's time to learn how to carry them differently. The evening waned, and as the gas lamps flickered to life along the boulevard, Lucien stood by the window, watching the shadows dance silently. The case had ended, the killer unmasked, but the echoes of their deeds lingered like a stubborn mist. The photographs, with their ghostly reflections and deceptive light, remained a haunting reminder that truth was often as elusive as the shadows themselves. In the quiet moments that followed, Lucien allowed himself a rare glance inward, confronting the demons of his past, the loss of his wife, the relentless pursuit of justice, the delicate balance between hope and despair. He knew the road ahead would be long, and the shadows on Rue Saint-Lazare would never fully fade. But beneath the melancholy, a cautious resolve took root. The city breathed around him, alive with stories yet untold, mysteries waiting in the folds of light and shadow. And Lucien Moreau, detective and seeker of truth, was ready to face whatever came next. Yet as the night deepened, a final photograph caught his eye, an image of a fleeting moment where light and darkness intertwined so perfectly it seemed to pulse with life. He reached out, fingers brushing its surface, and a chill ran down his spine. Some mysteries, it seemed, were destined to linger in the shadows forever. The pale light of dawn stretched across the Rue Saint-Lazare, casting elongated shadows from wrought iron balconies and the delicate outlines of lingering window panes. Detective Lucien Moreau stood silently at the edge of the cobblestone street, his breath visible in the cool morning air. The city was slowly stirring, a gentle hum of life awakening beneath the lingering veil of mist. Yet inside him, a restless shadow remained, an echo of the tangled mysteries he had pursued with such fervor. The events of these past weeks clung like a persistent fog, refusing to dissipate despite the capture of Julien Marchand. Lucien's footsteps echoed faintly as he approached the modest building that housed Lise Dumas's photography studio. The wooden door, worn yet sturdy, bore the subtle marks of time and care, a testament to the artistry and secrets contained within. He hesitated for a moment, fingers brushing against the doorframe before pushing it open. The familiar scent of old wood mingled with the faint aroma of photographic chemicals greeted him, stirring memories both painful and profound. Inside, Lise moved with quiet purpose, arranging her camera equipment with meticulous care. Her dark hair was pinned back, revealing the sharp angles of a face shaped by grief and resolve. A framed photograph rested on a nearby shelf, a delicate image of her lost sibling, eyes forever still but alive in silver tones. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the frame, a silent vow passing between past and present. "Lucien," she said softly, eyes lifting to meet his with a mixture of wariness and newfound trust. He nodded, the weight of unspoken words settling between them. "I thought I might find you here." She smiled faintly, the trace of a fragile hope. "It's where the truth first began, isn't it?" Their shared history was etched in shadows, and like the same forces that had shaped the sinister game they had unraveled. Yet even as they stood amid the relics of deception, both knew that some questions lingered beyond the reach of answers. Later, Lucien found himself at Henry Lefebvre's cafe, the warm glow of lamps casting soft pools of light over polished wood and the chatter of familiar voices. Henry, ever the gracious host, greeted him with a broad smile and a hearty handshake. "Monsieur Moreau," Henry said, his voice rich with local warmth. "You've been missed these days. The neighborhood feels different without you poking around." Lucien chuckled softly, settling into a corner chair where Sophie Moreau, his younger sister, sat nursing a cup of tea. Sophie's delicate features bore the traces of worry and relief, emotions intertwined like the threads of their shared past. "It's good to see you both," Lucien murmured. "The city breathes differently now," Sophie said quietly. "But the shadows can be long and stubborn." Lucien nodded, absorbing the comfort of community even as the unease persisted. The cafe's warmth was a stark contrast to the cold uncertainties that haunted his thoughts. As evening fell, Lucien wandered toward the sign, the river's surface shimmering with the fractured reflections of city lights. The gentle lapping of water against stone was a soothing rhythm, yet the interplay of light and shadow danced like a reminder of the fragile line between truth and illusion. He lit a cigarette, the ember glowing softly in the twilight. Exhaling a plume of smoke, his grey eyes traced the shifting patterns, understanding that some mysteries on Rue Saint-Lazare would always linger in the periphery, defying closure. The case had changed him, shaped by loss, perseverance, and the enduring complexity of human motives. Yet in this moment of quiet contemplation, Lucien felt a renewed determination. The shadows might linger, but so too would his resolve to seek justice, whatever form it might take. As the city breathed around him, Lucien Moreau stepped forward into the uncertain night, ready to face whatever truths and deceptions awaited beyond the horizon. But even as he walked away from the river's edge, a faint flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow slipping silently between buildings. The game was not yet over. Somewhere in the depths of Rue Saint-Lazare, the past whispered its secrets, waiting for the next light to reveal them. And so, the shadows that lingered promised that the story, like the city itself, was far from finished. The photographer's studio was quiet, save for the faint ticking of an old clock mounted high on the wall. Lucien Moreau sat at the worn wooden desk, his fingers tracing the edges of the last photograph from the case. The image was haunting a ghostly figure caught between harsh light and deep shadow. The edges blurred as if the person was dissolving back into the darkness from which they had briefly emerged. It was a final testament to the fragile boundary between reality and illusion, memory and deception. Outside the window, dusk was settling over Rue Saint-Lazare, the city's vibrant energy softening into the muted tones of evening. Liz Dumas stood near the pane, her silhouette framed by the fading light. Her dark hair was pinned back neatly, yet the softness around her sharp features betrayed the toll the investigation had taken. She breathed in deeply, the scent of rain and smoke mingling in the air. Though the studio was her sanctuary, it had also been the stage for shadows too deep to fully dispel. Lucien's grey eyes lingered on the photograph, the interplay of light and shadow reminding him of the long nights spent unraveling this tangled web. Each photograph had been a puzzle piece, a fragment of a larger truth distorted by artifice and pain. Yet even now, as the killer lay behind bars, the enigma remained: how much of truth could one ever capture when light was so easily manipulated? He reached for his cigarette, lighting it with practiced ease. The flickering flame cast a warm glow across his face, shadows dancing in the contours of his features. The smoke curled upwards, ghost-like, echoing the elusive figures in the photographs. Lucien exhaled slowly, the acrid scent filling the stillness. It was a ritual, a moment to gather his thoughts before the weight of memory pressed down too heavily. A gentle knock at the door broke the silence. Sophie Moreau entered quietly, her soft brown hair catching the last rays of daylight. She carried a small tray with tea, her delicate features marked by concern yet underscored with the unwavering support she always offered. "You've been at it for hours," she said softly, setting the tray down. "You need to rest, Lucien." He glanced up, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Rest can wait," he murmured. "There's still so much I don't understand." Sophie sat beside him, her presence a comforting anchor against the storm of his thoughts. "Sometimes the answers aren't in the photographs," she said gently. "Sometimes they're in the moments between the light and the shadow." Lucien nodded, the truth of her words settling deep within him. The case had changed him, shaped by loss, deception, and a relentless pursuit of justice. Yet, as much as he had uncovered, some shadows on Rue Saint-Lazare would never fully disappear. They lingered in the corners of his mind, in the fleeting images that haunted his dreams. Back in the studio, Liz carefully arranged the photographs on the wall, her fingers lingering on the final image. The studio was quieter now, the chaos of the investigation receding into memory. but the scars remained, etched into every frame, every reflection. She allowed herself a moment of resolve. This was not an end, but a beginning. The truth was a fragile thing, but so was hope. Lucien rose, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. He stood by the window, looking out at the city bathed in twilight. The train station's distant rumble was a reminder of the world moving forward, indifferent to the shadows it left behind. He thought of the victims, the lost souls captured in photographs they never posed for silent witnesses to a mystery that had tested the limits of perception. As night fully embraced Paris, Lucien felt the weight of the photograph in his hands. It was a final image, yes, but also a reminder that in the dance of light and shadow, truth was never absolute. It was a spectrum, shifting with every glance, every memory, every deception. He turned from the window, the cigarette now burned to its filter, and faced the studio one last time. Some mysteries, he whispered, are meant to linger. Outside, the shadows of Rue Saint-Lazare stretched longer, entwining with the fading light a silent promise that the story was never truly over. As the clock chimed softly in the background, Lucien flicked the last ash from his cigarette and embraced the uncertain dawn ahead.